In future casting, in any futures work, the future has to be designed by everyone.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I am your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. The topic of this episode is how futurecasting impacts education. And my guest is Cyndi Coon. I first worked with Cyndi on an Emerge, a Festival of Futures event at Arizona State University, and ever since then, I have followed the work of her and her colleagues as they futurecast for government agencies and private sector companies. So, what is futurecasting? Well, I'm going to let Cyndi explain it, but I think you will find that it directly applies to kids and education. This podcast was sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. And now, the interview.
My training is as a creative. So my mind already thought in a really expansive, imaginative way. And so future casting came to me because I met my now partner at the lab, Brian David Johnson. And we worked together on a project not related to future casting. It was a project about 7-8 years ago around the future of the American dream. And we worked together, and we had such a connection. In his background, he's an engineer and a designer, and he was Intel, the chip company's futurist in residence for a good long time, a decade plus. And he, working at Intel, realized that the practice he had developed, which is a sister to futurecasting called threat casting, really needed to be used by everyone and shouldn't just stay inside industry. And so right at that same time, we were connecting, and he left Intel to stand up the threat casting lab, which we stood up together at Arizona State University. And threat casting and future casting are similar, very similar. One looks to disrupt and mitigate, and one looks to enable. And so when I met Brian David Johnson, he said to me, "You have a natural analyst mind. You are already taking everything you do and running it through an analytical process to sort and cluster." And that was part of my practice as a producer. So prior to stepping into future casting, I produced large scale experiences. And that came with a lot of input and data and research in advance. And then I was analyzing to create these outcomes. And when he saw that, he said, "You're already doing what it takes to be a futurist." So we connected, and he trained me in threat casting and future casting. And the idea of it for me, why I became interested, is because I was already a part of this practice without realizing it. I was already somebody who did really long range kind of goal planning. And as a producer, I always had to work backwards. So I was backcasting before I understood the principles of backcasting. I would always start at the end and work my way backwards, because to pull something off, that's the way I saw it had to be. So immediately I took to future casting because it really was aligned with my practice already. It was already filled with all these juicy opportunities that I could go in and find more. I could look into the future. I could backcast for clients and really give them some insight to what they might see. So that's what got me started. Is really, I was working as a producer
Yeah.
and I was producing experiences, and it turns out this was a easy space for me to step into.
Well, let's take a step back and actually define for the listeners what future casting is.
Yeah. So future casting has a lineage back to the concept of forecasting and foresight. So that began in the
Okay.
US just after World War II. Um, our government was looking for solutions on how could we do better? How could we avoid uncertainty? And so the field of foresight was developed in the early 1950s. And foresight it's a series of tools. Now today there are over 50. Some of them are very specific for specific outcomes. Some of them are a little more broad ranging that you can use to get multiple results. But the forecasting and foresight tools a little bit go on the assumption of what has already happened or what has always happened, and
Right.
how might we use that history to make future changes. That's the concept of foresight.
Right.
So then future casting comes in because it it's really determined after a couple decades that that gives you a potential scenario that could be played out, but it doesn't actually tell you what to do. So foresight tools
Hmm.
are similar to, there's an arc. So we start with strategy as a concept and then move into foresight. And then you get into the space we're in future casting and threat casting, which builds narrative and it gives action. And so we consider ourselves
Hmm.
in this space of future casting as the script writers. We create the narrative that is the script that then the next group of folks use, which is the world builders. So if we're imagining the future through narrative, the next hands will actually start
Hmm.
building these things. And then the final group are the live experience, wargaming, actual live happening. And so that's kind of the arc of where we sit. And what we're really doing
Okay.
is we're pulling on a variety of tools from Foresight, scenario planning. We're looking at trends. We do a lot
Hmm.
of analysis. We interview subject matter experts, and we use all of that to create effects
Hmm.
based models. These effects based models are narratives that we have individuals on teams build based on an exquisite research question that we write to look at something
Hmm.
very specific. So we never try to boil the ocean. We try to get really focused on what
Right.
we're looking at. And then we bring individuals into the room and create small teams for an experience exercise, and they work together to build a narrative around a very specific, invented but specific person in a place experiencing an event.
Okay.
And that's what future casting and threat casting do. And then we backcast
Right.
from whatever we chose as the future horizon. We often do 10 years. Um, and then come back present to today. And we look at markers all along the way. And we also look for things we call flags and gates. And I can tell you really quick, what
Right.
is a flag and gate, just for your audience? This is a quick way to imagine
Yeah.
it. So when we're looking between today and 10 years in the future, there are going to be indicators of things that occur that help us know,
Hmm.
are we headed in that direction? And so I like to
Right.
describe it like this. Imagine we're all sitting around a fire and we're talking about this topic and the wind starts to really blow and it's really whipping. And just
Mm.
over from us is a flagpole and the flag starts to really whip in the wind, and suddenly before we know it, before we can do anything, that flag falls right off the flagpole and it blows right into the fire that we're sitting around. Flag's gone. There's nothing you can do. You cannot recover it. But there are 3 more flags to go. So when that first flag burns up in the
Hmm.
fire, we know there's something really meaningful there, and we should really start paying attention because we don't want those other 3 flags to fall. Conversely, there's also a concept of a gate. So again, we're sitting around the fire, the wind whips up. Over yonder, there's a gate, flapping, flapping in the wind. We can hear it. We have a choice.
Right.
We can either get up and close that gate and close it tight so it stays closed, or we can hold it open so it's fully open and anything that needs to rush in or out can. So when it comes to gates, that's an indicator we can do something. It's not lost like a flag. It still has
Okay.
possibility. We can step in and we can either disrupt if we're trying to disrupt it, or we can enable
Right.
if we want it to happen.
If I am understanding this correctly, then some of these gates are positive. These are
Mhm.
gates that you predict might be coming along. And if you see that gate, then you have decisions that you need to make. That's either a good gate or a gate that if you continue through it, this is going in a way that you prepared for or that you want. And if you close it, that you're trying to stop something that you don't want from happening.
Exactly.
Is that fair to say?
Exactly right. The only thing I will add, only because you use the word prediction, I have to jump in there. We never
Okay.
predict, so we never use the word predict, and we do not predict.
Mm,
Why that is important is because in future casting, there is no one single future. I would never deliver and say,
okay.
here's your future, here's what you should know. The future is actually filled with multiple potential possibilities. So, what I'm doing is I'm
Okay.
saying you might look out for these 5 possible futures. And then I would say to you, it will
Okay.
not be one of those futures, but instead, it will be components of each of the 5 that culminate into your future. But if you pay attention to all the things going on in each of these potential futures that
Hmm.
we're saying are possible, then you will have all kind of indicators of things to watch for. And then you will learn, oh yeah, a piece of this, because the future is unpredictable because the humans do weird things.
Okay. And so the notion of a prediction is too much of a binary.
Yeah.
In other words, like if you're only looking for this one thing, you're going to miss all of these other components or all these other possibilities.
Well, and
Okay.
not only are you gonna miss possibilities, you're gonna miss something else that we do. So when you we have a research question and we're looking at that, we're gonna deliver to you an outcome based on what you asked.
Right.
However, there's something else that you're gonna get too. Because when you do work like this,
Hmm.
inevitably you're gonna find things you were not asked to find.
Right.
So we call that outliers. And
Okay.
so the other thing that happens is you're gonna find out I can't say to you, "Hey, you need to pay attention to this over here," because you didn't ask me to look for it. But
Mm,
I will find things and say, "Hey, I'm gonna give you a little outlier here to say, I know you're heavily looking over here, but somebody should probably be paying a little bit of attention over
hmm.
here too, because something's showing up." And that may grow if you don't pay attention.
Oh,
And that's why
wonderful.
we can't predict, because if there's lots of little offshoots that I'm telling you, and if I'm looking at one thing, I cannot bring in other elements from, other advanced technology or things that
Hmm.
could alter what we're talking about unless we brought it in the first place. But if we note, here's what to look for and here's what you didn't even think of, that expands everything you do. And so that's why never a prediction. Instead, lots of potential and possibility.
And who's using future casting right now? So who are the some of your clients? And if you can, what are some of the questions that you
Mhm.
are attempting to answer for them?
Mhm. So our main domains who utilize this work the most would include government
Hmm.
agencies, military, and industry related. So as an example, right now I am in the middle of looking at the future of the US ship building workforce.
Hmm.
So that is with the Department of Defense, and we are looking with multiple partners, project partners underneath. But the unique thing about that is we're really looking at what will we do? Because currently we don't have enough welders,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
electricians to meet our shipbuilding demand. That's a current example. I've looked at the future of aerospace. We've looked at cyber financial banking, which is a real big challenge right now, as you can imagine. Um, I've had the opportunity to do some really unique work in this space too. I'll talk about one of my absolute favorites that I'm still working on, that I started in 2020 or late 2019, which is a space known as cool abilities, which is an area where individuals with conditions formerly considered as disabled
Mm.
are now seen with their unique characteristics of their
Mm-hmm.
humanness as a superpower that may lead them to new work opportunities.
Mm.
That's work I've been doing to globally. There's even governments who are looking at how might we look at the human differently, instead of asking them to do this whole grouping of work at a
Right.
day job where people have to do all these tasks and things that are not their unique brilliance.
Right.
What if we let them shine in the brilliance that they arrive with? And what might the workforce entirely look like if everyone is able to do the pieces that are within their brilliance? And so right now we have a lot of people who aren't working in places they could be working because maybe
Mm-hmm.
they can't do the tasks that are, for someone else.
Right.
So looking, I would say, future casting and threat casting really is content agnostic.
Okay.
It's a social science methodology. It is a tool that you can put any question into. Um, and so we've worked across so many different requests and the research questions are, they're quite long, because they involve a constellation of elements.
Okay.
So we're looking at what is the future of, and you want to put something in.
Right.
How does it affect,
Right.
and you want to put something in, while addressing, and you want to put something in. So you want to look at how does your question affect humans,
Mm.
affect location, and affect surroundings. So all of that's going to go in a question so that um, we're considering all of the things that affect the human beings around the space that we're researching. And so, really, as I said, lots of government agencies,
Yeah.
academic, and anyone who really has a big, wicked question that they want somebody to stare out 10 years into the future.
Well, there so much in what you just said is going to sound. I think listeners are going to pick up on why I wanted you on the podcast from what you just said there, for a couple reasons.
Mm,
Number one, in talking about kids, we've addressed how schools tend to reward a very narrow set of skills that not all
mm,
kids have.
mm.
And so that was really interesting what you talked about the cooling. But it's also the case that we, on talking about kids, have addressed that kids aren't like autonomous, that they live inside a family, inside a context, inside a community. All of these things are interplaying with them. So I think that everything you said there just resonated. So I'll ask, what do you think we have to learn about the future of kids from future casting?
Oh, it's so fascinating and changing so
Right.
much. with Gen Z now 25 years old at the oldest, and, Alpha's now 11, 10 years old. Honestly, we have the most to learn from them.
Right.
In my work, I am constantly encouraging participants in exercises to take a breath, to
Yeah.
pause, and to take in the difference that is these future
Mm.
generations. They are so radically different from us in their thought process, in their understanding, and in their desires,
Mm-hmm.
motivations. So, you know, it is what I started to say, the biggest space we are going to have to take up and really embrace is what are the skills
Mm-hmm.
of this next generation?
Mm-hmm.
They are not our skills.
No.
They were born with radically different skills, and to try to shove them into it's I do believe it's part of the conversation around, Gen Z doesn't wanna work,
Mm-hmm.
they're lazy, whatever that is that we're hearing from people, when really what they're trying to say is, "We find the way you work inefficient.
Mm.
You are wasteful."
Right.
So, I think that if we could really let them run with the skills that they came into this world with, fully embracing, not trying to tell them they need to take these steps, they need to learn these additional things. They already know it.
Right.
Let them teach us. Look at the skill base they have and try to create a space where they're communicating what they could do for us
Mm.
instead of telling them, "Here's what you're gonna do." I think that's a really big part of it. I think listening up to where their passion base is.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of, security,
Mm-hmm.
fears
Mm-hmm.
that are incredibly real,
Mm-hmm.
and so if we would pause and we would listen to the alignment between their passion and their fear, we would find the place of where they want to enter.
Yeah.
And if we don't do that, they're just gonna do their own thing, and they're going to a lot of things will stop being
Mm-hmm.
in their lifetime because they need to be. There's a lot of things that are ineffective, they see
Mm-hmm.
it, and I think embracing tech in relationship to them is the
Mm-hmm.
other thing we have to do headed into the future. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think the conversation right now around Chat GPT is super exciting and
Mm-hmm.
exhilarating, and, I think the biggest mistake that could be made at the moment is to try to shut any of that down,
Yeah.
especially with that generation.
Yeah.
Instead, find unique ways to have them use their imagination to explore
Yeah.
it. Show them that it's just a calculator,
Yeah.
I mean, and it's just a word calculator. And so I don't think we have to be afraid of what they might do with technology. Instead, I think we have to ask
Mm-hmm.
them to lead. If I were teaching still in the classroom right now, I would turn it completely around,
Yeah.
and I would just say, "Get on here, show me." So
Well,
I
and
think, for the future. Yeah, go ahead.
well, no,
Great.
I think that what's so interesting is that the way that you approach future casting is the way that a lot of experts in education, going back hundreds of years, suggest that we should be teaching. We don't teach that way,
Mhm,
but for
mhm,
literally 150 years, we've had people in the world of education saying what you need to do to get people excited about learning and they're most productive in learning and creating is present a meaningful problem and provide them with
mhm,
tools. Then let them work it out and let them make mistakes and let them break
mhm,
things and let them form teams because not all kids have the same skills. So this person is going to be interested in this aspect of the problem and this person is going to bring this perspective and get them and provide a space where they can work together, teach each other and solve a meaningful problem. And to your point, that's what it's interesting. I've used that exact phrase to describe ChatGPT, and that it's a calculator for words,
Mm,
because I've said, there was a time we were afraid of calculators. But now,
yeah.
if you went to your accountant and your accountant was doing all of the math longhand on a piece of paper, like we teach kids to do, you would go to a different accountant because that's dumb. And so we're going to get
Mhm,
that place with, AI and certain forms of chat GPT for
mhm,
sure. Um, so when you go about listening to your experts, and when you go about listening and getting input from all the different people you bring together, what kind of environment do you create? What do you do to make sure that these different perspectives are all heard and valued?
mhm. Yeah, good question. So, in future casting, in any futures work, the future has to be designed by everyone.
Mm,
So, the really important work that I probably spend probably almost most of my time is diversity matters,
mm,
not just in background, in everything. So, diversity in background, of course, but gender, education,
mm-hmm,
domain, thought, everything I can pull together. So, when I am pulling together subject matter expert interviews for any particular future cast, I have to be really thoughtful about finding
mm,
people across that diversity, and that's because all it's the same thing with bias in AI. I mean, you have to have all voices
mm-hmm,
in so that any data that comes out, the input was equal going in, and then when I build my exercises, I have to fill the room with diversity. And that includes a perfect example. I have to have age because if I only have
mm-hmm,
millennials, Xers, and boomers in a room, my data is not as good. It's
mm-hmm,
not as rich. I have to have an 18 to 25-year-old in there and not as a token to speak to the whole generation, but so that those words are
mm-hmm,
inside of my data. I have a workbook that small teams are filling out together as they build this person in this place experiencing this event. And if I put in the most diverse, rich,
mm-hmm,
or the teams put in, your outcome from that allows you to create narrative that is a little more real
mm,
because you have all these different sets of
mm-hmm,
ideals, even if they are invented. And we encourage the exercise participants to go wild. We
right.
we put a little guardrails up. We
Okay.
say, 10 years out, let's not do flying cars and things like that
Right.
because that doesn't benefit. But the wilder you get, the better the results because it makes you think about if one of us in the room can think that up,
Mm.
somebody else can think it up too. And so that's why we push everybody to just go extreme because there's always people out there thinking extreme.
Cyndi, I want to thank you so much for sharing this work with us.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of my listeners are going to be taking away ideas for how to make their classrooms, their programs, maybe even their homes wild and weird with guardrails. So thank you so much.
Yeah. You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
That was Cyndi Coon. For more information about Cyndi and her work, please visit talkingaboutkids.com. From there, you also can find out about upcoming episodes, suggest a topic, learn more about me and my books, or submit your questions for future guests. Our theme song is by The Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young children, and the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.